This season, I think, is going to be one of the most entertaining NBA campaigns that I've ever watched. Mostly as a Brooklyn Nets fan, but just also as a fan of the league as a whole. Think about what we have, just starting with tonight. The Brooklyn Nets and the Milwaukee Bucks, to me, the two best teams in the NBA, bar none, without a doubt. The road to the championship will either go through Brooklyn or Milwaukee this season. I'm just going to come out and say it right now. And that's with the Brooklyn Nets not having Kyrie Irving, which, as we know, is a saga in and of itself. And then out in the Western Conference, we have probably the most competitive field we've had in a while. The Lakers, the Clippers, when Kawhi gets healthy, the Denver Nuggets, of course, the Golden State Warriors, who I'm very high on, and I don't seem to see many people who feel the same way about them. But since we're on the topic of NBA teams, we're going to start today's episode off with an NBA teams tier list. As you guys know, tier lists are huge in pretty much every avenue of content creation. And I felt that instead of just going one by one with every team and just giving my opinion on them, I figured why not rank them? Why not do a little power ranking? Now, please keep in mind that this has nothing to do with the games going on tonight. This is more so covering the season as a whole and what to expect from the season as a whole. I have 6 different tiers from best to worst, best of the best, contenders, potential conference finalists, the middle of the pack, not quite there, and the final tier is the poop tier. There are only a couple of teams in the poop tier, but when we get to that, you're going to see why these teams are so shitty. So we're just going to go in alphabetical order because this is how the teams were arranged for me. We are starting off with the Atlanta Hawks. As we know, the Atlanta Hawks are coming off of a conference finals run. However, I feel that that remains their ceiling for this season. Of course, they have Trae Young, Clint Capella, John Collins, Kevin Herter, DeAndre Hunter, Bogdan Bogdanovic. This team is a very, very solid team. I'm just going to go ahead and put them in the potential conference finalist tiers. I don't see them as a contender at all. I still feel that youth is a big problem for them. I mean, not even a problem, but their youth, their defense is atrocious. And I don't think that their offense is strong enough to overcome that. I was saying the same thing about the Brooklyn Nets last season, but even, towards the end of the season, they picked it up considerably, creeping up into like 18th or like 20th or something. So they were below average, but not among the worst teams in the league. Next up, Boston Celtics. I think the Boston Celtics are a potential conference finalist as well, mainly because of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. To me, the Celtics have kind of just like fallen off. Definitely not considerably, but the team is worse off, I feel like, than in years past. I mean, they did get Al Horford back, but I don't know how much of a difference that's going to make. It's really going to be relying on Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And luckily for the Boston Celtics and head coach Ime Udoka, fortunately for them, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown aren't anywhere near their peaks. I mean, when we talk about Jason Tatum, this is a dude who's a future MVP candidate, potentially also a future scoring title holder. This kid, I mean, we know how good he is. We know how good Jaylen Brown is, even though I don't know when he's coming back because he is dealing with COVID-19 as of right now. But I think the Celtics could have a pretty decent season. One thing about the East, and I just got done saying this about the West, is that the East is also very, very, very competitive this season. Brooklyn and Milwaukee, spoiler alert, they have separated themselves and clearly sit at the top of the pack. But there are 6, 7 other really good teams in the Eastern Conference. Maybe not conference finalist worthy, but playoff bound, and it's going to make the last couple of weeks of the season very entertaining. And speaking of separating themselves from the pack, I have my Brooklyn Nets, the best of the best. To me, Brooklyn is the best team in the Eastern Conference without Kyrie Irving. They are, of course, the best team in the Eastern Conference with Kyrie Irving. Although we don't know when Kyrie is coming back, KD is still there. James Harden is still there. Joe Harris, Paul Millsap, Patty Mills, Cam Thomas, James Johnson. The list goes on and on. This team is poised to have a nuclear campaign so long as everybody stays healthy. That is my biggest concern with the Brooklyn Nets. What is the health situation going to be like? Is it going to be a repeat of last season? I sure as shit hope not. More than anything else, so I just hope that everyone is healthy for the postseason because, the regular season, it is what it is. Obviously, you want to have home court advantage going into the playoffs. You want to have the most advantageous matchup possible heading into the playoffs. But it kind of is irrelevant, especially again when you consider the talent of this team. Who do we have up next? Chicago. The Chicago Bulls are one of the teams that I am personally going to keep an eye on and watch as frequently as possible. I've raved about Chicago all off season long. I think that they had the best offseason, right up there with the Brooklyn Nets, right up there with the Miami Heat. But you get DeMar DeRozan, you get Lonzo Ball, even though the league is still, quote unquote, investigating the tampering that went on between those two parties. You have Alex Caruso, you have Nikola Vucevic, and of course, you have the god himself, Zach Levine. This team is one piece away from being a contender. I feel like. Of course, another thing is the chemistry that these guys are going to have to develop. I'm curious to see how long it takes for them to all gel with one another. Fortunately, Lonzo Ball is there to conduct all of it, and he's not someone who's going to take shots away from DeMar or Zach Levine or Nikola Vucevic. I don't really see that being an issue. And with, Zach Levine and DeMar DeRozan, everyone knows the offense is going to run through Levine. What's going to happen with DeMar DeRozan? I think he's going to play a lot more off ball, but I think he's going to get back to playing off the ball, back to when he was with the Toronto Raptors and playing alongside Kyle Lowry, because it's kind of a similar dynamic here, at least in terms of having multiple stars. Of course, Zach Levine is not the same kind of player that Kyle Lowry is, but he's someone that he's going to have to split touches with. He's someone who is going to command a lot of attention. He's someone who passes the ball pretty well for someone who really isn't a point guard. I'm just really interested to see how their dynamic plays together. And then you have Nikola Vucevic, who's just going to hold down the paint and kind of just create a lot of space for everybody else to operate. I think the Bulls are potential conference finalists. I do think that they're worse than Atlanta and Boston, but they're not a middle of the pack team. I don't feel like. Like, to me, middle of the pack are borderline playoff teams. I guess I should have renamed that to make it more appropriate, but fuck it. I guess next up, the Los Angeles Clippers. The Clippers, fully healthy, are a legitimate title contender. And I feel like I have to put them in the contender spot just because they will have Kawhi Leonard back at some point. And as soon as Kawhi Leonard comes back, the whole dynamic of that team is going to change. I do think that they're going to play pretty competitive basketball because Paul George is still a beast. I mean, he could very well have an MVP campaign depending on when Kawhi comes back, but I'm looking for a repeat of what he did in his final season with the Thunder. He was like third in the MVP voting, averaged 27 points, led the league in steals, was a defensive player of the year candidate as well. I'm going to put the Clippers in the contender slot because I truly feel that they are a contender. It's just a matter of when does that potential get realized again. And of course, it comes back with Kyrie Irving. Now, next up, we have the Charlotte Hornets. Charlotte is a very entertaining team, but at this point, I don't know if they're a playoff caliber team. I think that, LaMelo's great, Gordon Hayward's great, Terry Rozier as well. I just don't think they have it quite yet. Kind of short-winded. I do think that they're a middle of the pack team for sure. I mean, this not quite their tab. That's more so for teams who are rebuilding, who are showing some signs of potential. The Charlotte Hornets are beyond that already. And they could have been a playoff team last year. Of course, they got fucked over by injuries. LaMelo, I think, hurt his wrist. And then, Gordon Hayward suffered a foot injury or something like that. They could have punched through to get to the postseason. Of course, the East wasn't as competitive as it was or as it is going into this season. But I would not be shocked if Charlotte did play spoiler and maybe sneak in as an 8th seed. Or who knows, with this play-in tournament bullshit at the end of the season, they might be able to sneak into the postseason themselves. Not something that, at least in regards to the play-in tournament, not something that I get down with 100%. But if they're able to get into the postseason, so be it. Next up, Cleveland Cavaliers. Something in my bones is telling me that Cleveland does not belong in the poop tier, but they're also the Cleveland Cavaliers. And time after time, year after year, they just suck so badly. Times are different now. You have Colin Sexton. You have Darius Garland. That's a pretty decent backcourt lineup. I believe they also have Kevin Porter Jr., if I remember correctly. Let me just go and double check that real quick because that's a very, very decent backcourt. Let me just double check this roster, dude. What are we working with? Lowry Markkinen, I totally forgot about that. Torian Prince, Alan Sexton, yeah, Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen. I love my guy Jarrett Allen. And no, they don't have Kevin Porter Jr. Oh, no, that's right. They traded him to Houston. Anyway, I don't think Cleveland is in the poop tier. So all of you Cleveland Cavalier fans, you can kind of rejoice that your team is not going to be absolute dookie water this season, but definitely not quite there. I don't want to say no shot that Cleveland makes the playoffs this year, but if I had to bet, and I'm not a betting man, but if I had to bet, I would not bet on that. They're closer to being in the lottery than they are to being a playoff team. Next up, Denver. I've said this multiple times throughout the offseason. Denver is in the same boat as the Clippers, where they are contenders, but not as of right now because they are too dealing with quite a substantial injury. Jamal Murray coming back from, what was it, like an ACL tear that he suffered last February or so, somewhere around that. We don't know when he's going to come back. I'm thinking the earliest he comes back is Christmas. That's only a 10-month recovery. And also, I don't think the Nuggets feel that they have to rush him back anytime soon because you have Nikola Jokic, who's the league MVP. You have Michael Porter Jr., who just signed a fat extension after having a very respectable third season. You have Aaron Gordon as well. They just signed Jeff Green away from my Brooklyn Nets. I think he's going to be absolutely tremendous for that team. They're not going to fall. They're not going to just like fall into a volcano and suffer this big, spectacular regression this season. I definitely don't think that. Even, listen, without Jamal Murray, this team is still, I think, a top 4 team in the Western Conference. I mean, it's only by like a game or two, but they're in there. They're going to be competing for one of the top 4 seeds all season long. And with that, I'm going to put them in the contenders tier. I'm sure, as you guys have probably picked up on right now, I think that in terms of contention, the East has the two best teams. I've said that already. The West, and we'll get into this in a little bit, I feel that the West only has one true contender. One true contender. They have a bunch of teams that are on the doorstep of contention, especially with, again, Los Angeles or the Clippers and the Nuggets. But even those teams fully healthy, I don't know if they have a legitimate shot at bringing home a title. Now, we're getting to the Houston Rockets. Here we have it. We have the first team in the poop tier, and I promise I'm not spiting Houston Rockets fans for one of their state representatives, Ted Cruz, throwing himself into the Kyrie Irving situation. I just think that Houston does not have a very good team. I mean, the only guy off the top of my head who makes them worth watching is John Wall. Maybe that's just me being a dumbass, but let's take a quick gander at the roster. Why don't we? So we have John Wall, who isn't going to be playing, I don't think, unless something's changed. Like, the team is not interested, or neither side is interested in a buyout, but John Wall is interested in playing elsewhere if Houston can facilitate something. They have John Wall. I totally disrespected Christian Wood. I'm sorry about that. Christian Wood was an all-star for me up until he suffered his injury last season. I mean, you still have Eric Gordon. You have Kevin Porter Jr., Daniel House, Daniel Tice, Jayshawn Tate. I don't foresee this team having a good season, even if they are better than last year. They won 17 games last year, 17-55. They were the worst team in the Western Conference. I think they were the worst team in the NBA, or at least, if not by record, definitely in terms of just perception. I think they're going to be poop this year. I'm sorry, Rockets fans, that you have to deal with this, but unfortunately, when your front office and your ownership is as busted as the Houston Rockets, there really isn't much of anything to take solace in. And believe me, this is coming from a guy who watched Billy King trade every draft pick, every asset that Brooklyn had for Gerald Wallace, Kevin Garnett, and Paul Pierce. So I know what you guys are going through. There are brighter days ahead. It's just a matter of when are they going to come. Unfortunately for the Brooklyn Nets, it took like 5 or 6 years or so for that to happen. So keep your fingers crossed, Rockets fans. And listen, at least Texas has other teams that you guys can watch. I don't know how the television deal works down there, but like if you're in Houston and you get to watch Rockets games and Mavericks games and Spurs games, I wouldn't feel bad about watching the Mavericks, just so you can like kind of remember what competitive basketball feels like. Now, next up, we have the Los Angeles Lakers. I am not sold on the Lakers. I think I've said that every week for the last 6 weeks. I don't think that the Lakers are winning a title this year. I think that they're getting bounced in the second round. I would not be surprised to see them fail to make a Western Conference Finals. This is no disrespect to Anthony Davis or LeBron James. This is no disrespect to Russell Westbrook. Those three guys are going to be responsible for a majority of the team's success. I don't think anyone is questioning that. But the rest of the roster, what the fuck was the Lakers front office doing this offseason? They simply do not compare to last year's team. A team that got bounced in the first round by the Phoenix Suns. Of course, Anthony Davis wasn't there, and that was a huge reason. But like, even if AD was there, I don't think the Lakers are blowing the Suns out. I think the series is still going 7 games. I still think the Suns had a legitimate chance to beat them, even if the Lakers were fully healthy. But you get rid of KCP. You get rid of Montrezl Harrell. You get rid of Kyle Kuzma. Say what you will about Kyle Kuzma. He was at least someone who could produce. Now, who do you replace them with? You bring in Wayne Ellington, Trevor Ariza, Malik Monk, Kendrick Nunn, Dwight Howard. You have Talen Horton-Tucker, who unfortunately is dealing with a thumb injury. He tore a ligament in his hand somewhere. I don't know how long he's going to be out. I don't know if that was ever disclosed, but still, one of your better young players is not going to be with you through the beginning of the season. You also have LeBron James and Anthony Davis are kind of injury prone. LeBron James is getting older. We don't know how healthy he's going to be. We don't know how he's going to play in regards to being the first option, because I've noticed, and I don't think I'm the only one who's noticed this, but LeBron has been ceding more and more usage to Anthony Davis, at least throughout the regular season, because LeBron is aware that he can't carry teams how he did back when he was in Cleveland, back when he was in Miami. Anthony Davis needs to be the most aggressive and the most dominant version of himself this year to help the Lakers avoid a catastrophically underwhelming performance. This guy needs to be Shaq-like in his attack. And the most frustrating part about this is that Anthony Davis has the talent to be that dominant, but is there going to be a mental switch? Like back when he was with the New Orleans Pelicans, when he was going into the playoffs, basically carrying that team by himself, and he's putting up like 35 and 15 with 4 blocks. That's the type of production that the Lakers are going to need. I do think they are title contenders, because it would be silly not to think that with a team that has LeBron, that has AD, two guys who could very, very easily both land as MVP finalists. I just think that the rest of the team does not complement them that well at all. And I think that even them fully healthy compared to the Clippers and the Nuggets, I still think that the Nuggets for sure are a better team. I think the Clippers are a little bit better, but actually, let me go ahead and... Now, next up, Milwaukee Bucks. Folks, there is not much I can say about the Milwaukee Bucks, about Giannis, about Drew, about Chris Middleton. This team is an absolute fucking burner. They are a supernova to the highest degree. And this is why that I feel ultimately when the Nets and Bucks meet in the playoffs, this will be the actual NBA Finals, because they are the two best teams in the league. I hope the records reflect that at the end of the year. And it will be the most entertaining matchup. It will be the most, I don't want to say violent, but violent in regards to just teams, going back and forth, trading punches with each other. They're without a doubt the best of the best. I'm putting them behind Brooklyn only by a little bit, because the Bucks didn't really get that much better this offseason. I know they lost PJ Tucker, at least compared to the Nets. One positive is that Dante DiVincenzo should be back this season. Many people didn't talk about it, but last postseason, I forgot when he went out, but Milwaukee didn't have him for the series against the Nets. Definitely, I think he got hurt like right in the beginning of the postseason, and he was absent. I think that was a relatively crushing blow, but as you can see, it didn't really affect them that much. Yeah, Milwaukee, I'm excited as a Nets fan to watch these teams play both Tuesday night, tonight, the night that I'm recording, or the day that I'm recording, and then just throughout the season. I think that these matchups, they're must-see TV, and if you're not watching them, I have no words for you. So next up now, we have the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat, to me, are another interesting team because they definitely improved by adding Kyle Lowry, but I don't know how much better he made them. Miami, to me, was always a team that I don't want to say always, obviously not always, but Miami in the last couple of seasons, like they didn't seem that deep to me. Like they had Bam, who is a fantastic player, of course. Jimmy Butler, hell of a performance in the 2019 NBA Finals. Now they have Kyle Lowry, respectable 3-point shooter, insane playmaker, great facilitator, just overall an upgrade over Goran Dragic. Even though he's not as offensive minded or as scoring minded as Dragic was, they don't really need that because you have Tyler Hero, you have Bam, you have JB, you have like 60 points right there at the least. And then you have Duncan Robinson, the 3-point specialist, and then Kyle Lowry can give you 15, 16, 17 points if necessary. But I don't feel that Miami has a legitimate shot at contending or making it to the NBA Finals unless something unfortunate happens to Milwaukee and Brooklyn. So I'm going to put them in the contender column ahead of the Los Angeles Lakers, just barely behind the Los Angeles Clippers. I mean, I feel like those teams are pretty even with one another. So, they're kind of tied for second in that regard.